Abu Dhabi, a country born between the sea and the desert. Oil and wealth, luxury and traditions. A young and vibrant nation which is constantly reinventing itself. A modern miracle that arose from the desert 40 years ago.
The pace of change has been absolutely dramatic, and it's perhaps faster here and in other parts of the Arabian Gulf than it has been in any other part of the world.
How did this country end up as it is? And it has a fascinating history, a history that is very much kind of speeded up in the last 20, 30 years than many other countries in the world.
More than 40 years ago, Abu Dhabi was one of the least developed places in the world. Today, it has achieved an income level comparable to that of the industrialized nations. With a population of nearly 1.6 million people, almost 80% of them are expatriates who work and live in these world-class infrastructures developed in the middle of the desert. How can culture and traditions be maintained in one of the fastest growing countries in the world? Abu Dhabi is the largest of the 7 emirates and the federal capital of the United Arab Emirates. Situated in the southeast of the Arabian Peninsula, the fact that it is bounded by the Arabian Gulf has oriented the inhabitants of the coast towards the sea. On the other hand, a desert which covers more than half of the country is a strong cultural provider to society. Archaeologist Peter Hellyer first arrived in Abu Dhabi in 1975 and has been uncovering its past for more than 35 years now, making him an exceptional witness of all the changes this country has gone through.
When you look at the people of Abu Dhabi today, and you can see that there are people from the traditional tribes that are driving in their fast cars and living in air-conditioned buildings, it's difficult to imagine the life that their ancestors lived in the past. And it's also difficult sometimes, unless you look carefully, to see the way in which those traditions of the past have been carried forward and are remembered by certainly some of their descendants today. Traditionally, the population of Abu Dhabi Emirate was a mixture of Bedouin tribes, nomadic tribes who would be moving around the desert with their camels and sometimes with sheep and goats, moving wherever there was sufficient water for them to be able to give water to their camels and to be able to water themselves.
Nomadic tribes that had domesticated camels created irrigation systems for the oasis and learned to survive in one of the world's most extreme deserts, together with coastal settlements that made a living in the pearl business and traded with India, Persia, or Turkey. For thousands of years, that was life in Abu Dhabi, until the end of the 1950s, when a treasure was going to be discovered beyond the desert. Oil. Oil enough to change a whole society. And a man was ready to be the architect of that change. In 1966, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan became the ruler of Abu Dhabi and envisioned that the wealth from oil had the potential to transform the country. Sheikh Zayed built roads, hospitals, schools, and universities, and was the principal driving force behind the formation of the United Arab Emirates. But he never forgot what life was like before oil.
Their parents, and certainly their grandparents, were often thirsty. They had virtually nothing to eat. If they went out hunting and came back with nothing, they went hungry. They didn't turn on a tap, and they didn't go to the supermarket, and they certainly didn't turn on the air conditioner. And Sheikh Zayed believed it was important that those memories of the past were carried on and taught to the present generation so that they appreciated the hardships of their ancestors, learnt from that the need to live in an equitable way, in a sustainable way within the environment, and they also learnt to be grateful for the benefits that they themselves had received.
Ancestors who had developed one of the most singular relationships between man and animal.
The Seika falcon is the national emblem of the United Arab Emirates, and in the same time it is the traditional Arab hunting falcon. Now, falconry here in Abu Dhabi has an entirely different background compared to falconry in Europe. Falconry here was never considered as a sport or as an entertainment, how it is considered in Europe. Here, falconry derives from the time when the Emirati people were still Bedouins and lived in the desert. In those former times, it was not easy for them to survive in the desert. But those Bedouins knew that there is one route of the bird migration that's passing over the Arabian Peninsula and the Abu Dhabi Emirate. So they went to those places, trapped those wild falcons, and used those falcons for falconry in order to hunt meat to let their families survive.
Dr. Margaret Müller has been living in Abu Dhabi for more than 11 years now. She left her hometown in Bavaria to direct the Abu Dhabi Falcon Hospital, the largest falcon hospital in the world.
The relationship between the Bedouin, the falconer, and the falcon is a very interesting one, because it is a very strong bond between the falcon and the falconer, but also the other way around. Now, the falcon recognizes his owner, it recognizes the falconer, and in the same time, the falconer himself, he's taking extremely good care of his falcon. He really loves the bird, and we see it here especially in the Falcon Hospital. They are doing routine examinations now for the falcons, but the concept of falconry has remained the same. This has not changed. And when we think about falconers going for falconry trips, that's more or less done in the same way like it was done in previous times. And this is so important, and that's the reason why me and my staff are so happy that we are able to contribute to this change. Because you cannot move a nation from a Bedouin lifestyle into a 21st century lifestyle without preserving its roots.
Roots that were laid in the Bedouins' desert life. A life that, since it centered on mobility, meant that land held no value for them. Instead, camels and falcons became the measure of a man's wealth.
The interesting thing is the people of Abu Dhabi and the Emirates and their relationship with the different animals that we just take for granted nowadays. In actual fact, the people living 7,000 years ago, they already had a domestic cow and sheep and goat. But they didn't have domestic camel at this time. What's quite interesting is that it's not until the Iron Age, around 3,000 years ago, that the camel, that's the dromedary camel, becomes first domesticated.
And that made it possible for people to cross the desert. You couldn't have done it otherwise. A camel has the capacity not only to cross the desert itself, but to take with it a tribe the men, the women, the children, and their belongings, they could move, they could migrate from one place to another.
In addition, these animals provided the Bedouins with milk, meat, fuel, and even blankets and tents, as they do today. The Al Ain Camel Market is famous throughout the country and attracts breeders and buyers from all over the United Arab Emirates. The camels are kept in a series of fenced paddocks according to their intended use. Young camels, reared for meat, are separated from older animals kept for breeding and milk. But the roots of this culture sink deeper than it was thought. Modern research at archaeological digs has discovered a great number of ancient objects which have proved the presence of man in this area since the Stone Age. The traces of man in these lands have come down to us in the form of crafts, which have lasted more than 7,000 years and which reveal to us an unsuspected past. The largest Bronze Age complex in the UAE, dating from the 3rd millennium BC, is located at Hili Archaeological Park, a landscaped garden designed to highlight the remains and make them accessible to the public. The Grand Tomb at Hili is over 4,000 years old. In those times, the people of southeastern Arabia buried their dead in collective graves like this, which must originally have housed hundreds of bodies.
At Hili, people, as I said, they built actually a kind of mud brick towers and a kind of moat around the Hili site to kind of protect the well and also to secure it. The other important thing to say is that these people were not just farmers. The reason that they, of course, became rich in the Bronze Age is more to do with what lays hidden in the mountains. Now, what lay hidden in the mountains, of course, was copper. And copper mining became the key thing for Southeast Arabia.
Jebel Hafit Mountain dominates Al Ain and straddles the border between the United Arab Emirates and Oman. The mountain rises over 1,200 meters above sea level and is famous for its ancient remains. Now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, approximately 5,000 years ago, the early inhabitants of the area chose the northern escarpment and eastern slopes of this mountain as burial grounds for their dead. Over 500 tombs have been discovered, and inside them, pieces of pottery that were originally from Mesopotamia.
Why did this Bronze Age civilization develop in this particular place? You know, why in Al Ain? Why Jebel Hafit? The answer really is location, location, location. You know, the specific reasons, there are certain advantages in this area. It's in a very strategic crossroads point for crossing from Southeast Arabia, of course, northwards into Iran and connections into Asia. You have water here, you have copper resources here. You, of course, have other valuable food supplies, the wild animals inhabiting Arabia, such as gazelle and wild hare and Arabian oryx. So the people could live quite happily here. I mean, the other important element to the story is marine resources, in that this kind of combination life of spending some time in the mountains, some time in the oases with the date palms, some time on the coast fishing. This kind of pattern of life, of moving between these different sort of ecological zones, is very much kind of the kind of birthing point of the sort of later sort of Bedouin nomadic kind of form of existence, you know, of moving where there is water, moving where there is food.
But the sea was also making another important contribution to this culture: trade. The discovery of a 7,000-year-old pottery vessel may be evidence of early trade across the Arabian Gulf between southern Mesopotamia and an island community off the coast of the United Arab Emirates.
So this pot was actually made in southern Iraq over 7,000 years ago, and then somehow it came to this Marawa island. And this is quite an interesting phenomenon, because we know that people at this time, 7,500 years ago, they had boats. They were sailing up and down in the Gulf in their primitive kind of boats. They were trading, so they were doing business. But no, I mean, people in prehistory were also doing business, and they were doing business with neighboring civilizations, neighboring empires, just as we do today in the modern world. So you have a very different perspective, you know, at that time. You know, the ancient trade connections connect Mesopotamia to the Central Gulf, to the Lower Gulf. UAE was always connected, of course, to Oman, and Oman was connected to Zanzibar and East Africa. So all this complex Western Indian Ocean was connected, even from prehistoric times.
Now, the lateen sail wasn't discovered in Europe, or didn't reach Europe until, you know, the Middle Ages. And it was the use of lateen sails that allowed the Portuguese to develop the boats that enabled them to sail to the New World and around the Cape of Good Hope and to conquer large parts of the Indian Ocean. But the sailors here, they knew it 2,500 years before that. So I think one important thing to remember about the history of the Emirates and of Abu Dhabi, and about the nature of its people, is that they have always been a people engaged in international maritime trade. They were never isolated.
As a reminder of those times, nowadays, dhow races are still held in Abu Dhabi. They follow routes taken by the early pearling dhows, when each captain raced to be the first back to port and perhaps get the best price for his pearls. At the port of Abu Dhabi, in front of skyscrapers and highways, a fishing community still lives and works using boats that seem like remnants from an ancient time. They are a reminder that less than a century ago, this highly developed city was little more than a pearling and fishing port. Nowadays, Abu Dhabi City is a cosmopolitan island capital that blends modernity and traditional Arabian culture. In 1966, when Sheikh Zayed became ruler, there were fewer than 20,000 people living in Abu Dhabi. At the beginning of the 21st century, Abu Dhabi City, with a population of around 600,000, boasts a Manhattan-style skyline, with high-rise buildings towering over a city inhabited by people coming from the four corners of the earth. And like a beacon at the entrance to the city stands the Sheikh Zayed Grand Mosque, one of the world's largest. It was born as a cultural statement that crosses boundaries with people from everywhere. Crystals from Austria, marble from Italy, China, and Greece, and tiles bearing calligraphy from Turkey combine to produce a national landmark with 24-karat gold-topped domes. Master craftsmen from all over the globe have worked in the finest materials to raise this place of worship. Its figures belong to a megastructure. The more than 22,000 square meter mosque site is equivalent to the size of about 5 football fields and can accommodate more than 40,000 worshippers. Traditional Arabian culture and modernity blend together in Abu Dhabi, but the very soul of the city now depends on its future. A future like the one being built on Saadiyat Island. Frank Gehry, Zaha Hadid, Jean Nouvel, or Tadao Ando, some of the finest architects in the world, are creating a cultural district where the Guggenheim, the Louvre, or the Zayed National Museum will play an important role for the city's population. A population that is set to triple from 600,000 to more than 3 million in the next few decades. Thanks to modern technology and thousands of workers, this will be achieved, representing the second birth of Abu Dhabi. But even nowadays, the city has to face an old and familiar neighbor. The desert. Sandstorms are a part of life in Abu Dhabi. For ages, in the heart of the desert, winds have been blowing loose sand and transporting these particles, creating sandstorms. In this hostile habitat, the Bedouins were able to create their first settlements. In the 21st century, the city is also able to conquer the desert. But until the 20th century, the way land was conquered in Abu Dhabi was based on conflict and struggle, shaping this part of the world in battles which brought turmoil to nearly every part of the region. There are no battles now, but its symbols can still be found in modern Abu Dhabi. Today, local young men still perform the Ayala, a popular battle scene dance. This dance requires male participants to form 2 to 4 rows, wielding sticks as swords, and alternately moving forward and backward to symbolize victory and defeat, as they used to do in what now seems a distant world. The same world Wilfred Tessiger documented in his books. Tessiger was a natural outsider, an Englishman who crossed the desert twice, trekking across the western sands to Abu Dhabi on a journey now remembered as the last great expedition across Arabia. Tessiger wore the clothes of the Bedouin and spoke the language of the Bedouin, who used to call him Sheikh Mubarak of the North. In his books, he wrote about a time of conflict and loyalty, of traditions and war, of men and horses.
The Arab horse is about 4,000 or 5,000 years, which the man knows. It's been in the Arabia. And the man bred the horse, the Arab horse in particular, is actually is bred for war, not to be beauty, not to be, a beautiful horse or just to have a horse. No, it's bred for a purpose. With that purpose, it's war. And that's always in the Arab history, all the wars is all on camels and horses.
Ali Al-Amiri has spent most of his life training stallions and mares. In his stables near Al-Watba, he still preserves the long Bedouin tradition of training and breeding Arabian horses.
Before the four-wheel drives we had our horses and camels. And if this horse is not trained well, if he's spooked for something, and just run away, if I stop or I fall off the horse and the horse gone, run away, in the desert, basically I'll be dead. So that's why we train our horses to be standing with us and standing by with us. Doesn't matter what's around them, doesn't matter what they hear or what they see. They got to be brave enough and they got to be calm enough to handle anything around them and to be very brave, to not scared from anything.
Ali is eager to pass on his knowledge to his sons. He is teaching his son Sultan the secret of maintaining a special bond with horses, as their forefathers used to.
Can you swim across the ocean? Even the best swimmer, he cannot swim across the ocean. So the Arab horse to me is like the ocean. And I'm learning every day from the Arab horse. I'm still, all my life with horses, I'm still learning more every day from the Arab horse himself. And they are teaching me every day new things.
Camel races nowadays are one of Abu Dhabi's main sports and are followed on television by thousands of viewers. For millennia, Bedouins carried out the careful selective breeding of camels, trying to maintain a pure breed of refined, stronger, and faster racing camels. Today, these camels are part of a major industry, employing some 9,000 workers who tend to over 14,000 racing camels. Thanks to modern technology, the camels are now controlled by robots so as to avoid underage workers in the UAE, which caused controversy during the past use of children as jockeys. Valuable prizes and cash awards worth millions of dirhams are now distributed among the winners. But winning is not an economic issue. Tradition still means more than money in Abu Dhabi. The winning camel will bring its owner tremendous honor and prestige, just as in the past. Armed with horses, falcons, and camels, the Bedouins marched across the desert and became the rulers of the sands, of that empty quarter that used to be a barrier to humans. And to protect it, they built forts along its frontiers. About 4 kilometers from the border with Oman, Al-Mizyad Fort dates back to the 19th century and provides a commanding view over a broad plain. Sheltered by Jebel Hafit mountain, it is one of the largest and most heavily fortified buildings in the Al Ain region. And it would have given the fort's defenders early warning of any threat. Forts were built to protect the most important of all treasures: water and the fertile soil of the oasis. In the same region, Al-Jahili Fort stands as one of the largest forts in the country, being a symbol of power and control over the years. Built at the end of the 19th century, it was used as a royal summer residence away from the heat and humidity of the coast. Situated near the Al Ain oasis, the design of its round tower is believed to reflect an ancient tradition of fortification. A circular tower of similar construction excavated at Hili, dating back to the 3rd millennium BC, gives us the idea of how oases were protected. But this fort not only protected the biggest of several oases in the region. For thousands of years, the oasis of Al Ain was an important caravan stop on the ancient trade routes across Arabia. For centuries, the Garden City, as it is known, was at the crossroads of trade routes for people traversing the great seas of sand of Arabia. Today, Al Ain is a modern city whose population has grown, making it the second most important in Abu Dhabi. But inside the oasis, a channel system remains unaltered, revealing the way the Bedouins were able to tame the limited fertile soil in the area. This technique, together with the domestication of the camel, allowed them to settle and create cities in the desert.
3,000 years ago also, people had discovered how to use affalage, which is the falage system of underground water channels.
This ingenious system distributes underground water through a network of tunnels, which eventually emerges into open channels whose flow can be directed and regulated to water farms and palm trees. A system that reinvented life in the desert.
So it's kind of a revolution in the Iron Age. Suddenly you have people that have domesticated the camels, and they're able to use the camels for long distance trade. Also, they manage to manage the water systems so they can expand into new areas where previously there was no water and desert. They can now go there. So we have big population expansion in that time.
The doors to the desert were open, and to the creation of new settlements and cities. Today, as happened thousands of years ago, a new city is being built. A place that is reinventing the city as we know it. Located just outside of Abu Dhabi, Masdar City is one of the most ambitious new eco-cities under construction. One that is carbon neutral, waste-free, and powered by renewable energy.
The Masdar City shall be the role model of a new urban development, which is geared towards sustainable development and renewable energies. And this shall show that we can build even cities, whole communities that are not consuming energy like cities that are like cities at the moment. You can say that the UAE, a country that has a lot of fossil fuels, doesn't really need such an initiative. However, the government, the leadership here, have actually realized that this is a resource that will come to an end at some point. And the aim is to get away from fossils. So the Masdar initiative was launched to basically mark the cornerstone of this change. And also we are having a kind of lighthouse function where we want to show the rest of the public that there are other ways of living that there are ways to do it different, and this is the way for Mazda to go forward, to now bring things on the ground, to show that it is really possible and viable what we are saying, and to continue inspiring others to do it in a similar way.
Masdar means the source, and it aims to be the source of a new start, as the Falaj channel system was for the Bedouins. With the creation of Masdar, Abu Dhabi is designing a new kind of city, showing the world that man can once again live in harmony with nature. Another source for a new start lies in Sirbani Yas Island. Located about 250 kilometers southwest of Abu Dhabi City, Sirbani Yas Island is a working wildlife sanctuary which is home to more than 10,000 free-roaming animals, including Arabian oryx, cheetahs, hyenas, and gazelles. Sirbani Yas Island looks like this country used to ages ago. The very name Abu Dhabi means father of the gazelle, and that is an indication of what biologists are trying to achieve here.
In the 1970s, Sheikh Zayed had the vision to conserve species for future generations. In the beginning, this started off as his own private collection, where he took endangered animals from the Arabian Peninsula and also from other areas of the world also. And they were kept previously in camps and breeding populations. What we've tried to do now is to carry on with this legacy as much as possible, but to also create different conservation systems within the islands.
The breeding program was so successful that the population soon increased considerably. Natural methods were applied to ensure a balanced ecosystem.
Within the Arabian Wildlife Park, we have both predators and herbivores free-ranging. The idea of the park itself was to create a working ecosystem, because we have a lot of ungulates and they keep breeding, which is a good thing, but we need some kind of natural control. So we introduced the predators into the park for this reasons.
Created to protect the wildlife of Arabia, Sirbani Yas was a desert island where it rarely rains more than twice per year. To maintain this haven, the artificial application of water was needed. Irrigation systems have turned the desert into expanses of green, keeping these species alive. Species like this one in particular, which represents the very nature of Sirbani Yas, the once mythical unicorn, the Arabian oryx.
In 1972, the Arabian oryx was declared extinct in the wild. So the animals that we currently have on Sirbani Yas have been bred and managed to try and create larger herds and also to maintain as much genetic diversity as possible. Sheikh Zayed had the foresight at the time to capture some of the remaining wild individuals and place them in safe places around the UAE. The Arabian oryx has been such a successful breeding program since this point that it's actually considered our flagship species for Sirbani Yas. We started off with only a very few individuals in the 1970s, and then exchanges and breeding over this period of time until now. We now have 500 individuals which are in a managed herd on the island. These individuals are obviously very important because the Arabian oryx is extinct in the wild. And within the UAE itself, they're important because we are contributing to the Abu Dhabi Environment Agency's reintroduction program of Arabian oryx into the wild completely.
In the near future, these animals will be released into the wild, bringing hope to a species which had almost disappeared. With Sirbani Yas Island, Sheikh Zayed's pioneering conservation work is trying to raise awareness of the urgent need to preserve wildlife for future generations. This place assumes the responsibility for the legacies of the past and the experiences of the present. On this very island that is now an ark for endangered species, another treasure was going to be discovered. Archaeological evidence that became one of the most significant archaeological finds on the Gulf and brought archaeologists from all over the world.
In 1994, a group of archaeologists were invited to Sirbani Yas Island at the invitation of the late President Sheikh Zayed, and he asked us to investigate this island, and we found a very important site located on the eastern side of the island. When we started excavating it, we weren't quite sure what we were dealing with. It seemed to be a settlement with a series of rooms and buildings. The pottery that we started finding, we knew this was from the just from the pre-Islamic period. It was from the sort of 200-300 years just prior to the arrival of Islam in this area.
For years, archaeologists worked to unearth the pieces that would clarify who built these forgotten walls and when.
What actually we'd found was a Christian church and monastery. We found plaster crosses with Christian crosses and decoration. And we began to realize that what we had actually within this complex was a church in the middle of the complex, and then around the outside of it, a series of dormitories or sleeping rooms, which would be for the priests who operated within the monastery.
Since then, archaeological studies have revealed the history of this settlement and how Christianity had penetrated far further than was thought before.
The monastery site was probably founded about 600 AD and lasted until about 750. So it was established before the beginning of Islam and flourished for about 100 years, 150 years before it was abandoned. That site is the best preserved Christian monastery in the whole of Eastern Arabia, and it tells us an enormous about the way in which Christianity spread through the Arabian Peninsula before the coming of Islam.
In Abu Dhabi, when you skip the obvious and look deeper, lots of things can be found apart from skyscrapers, cities being built from the blue, and other amazing projects. Looking for what lies beyond, one finds a society born between the sea and the desert. A society proud of its ancestors who worked hard in this harsh environment.
This country does have a very rich and ancient history and an ancient prehistory. And it's a message that, you know, we have to get across to the people here, that they have to be proud of their country. It's always been an important location. They shouldn't be proud of it because of oil, and this is the later stuff. They should be proud of their deep prehistoric roots and connections.
You cannot move a nation from a Bedouin lifestyle into a 21st century lifestyle without preserving its roots.
The government encouraging us to keep our heritage on. It's a lot of competitions, falconing, and horses, camels, it's all there. And you see, and they are actually putting a lot of effort, our government, to keep our heritage on, because we are losing it.
I tell the young people, you do have a past. It's of great importance. Be proud of it.
Don't miss a brand new series of Taboo, pushing boundaries with a double bill on sex and extreme bodies tomorrow from 9. Next, another chance to catch a smuggler.